I was 22 years old, living alone in a small rented house. It was a quaint little place, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, perfect for someone just starting out on their own. The house had a simple layout: living room, a couple of bedrooms, a kitchen, and a long hallway that connected them all. My favorite spot was the back bedroom, which I had turned into my personal sanctuary. It was at the far end of the house, isolated from the rest of the rooms. I loved spending my evenings there, sitting at my PC with my headphones on, lost in the music or a good game. The back bedroom was cozy and quiet, the kind of place where you could easily lose track of time. The only window looked out into the backyard, and with the door closed, it felt like my own little world. The house itself was usually silent, with only the occasional creak or groan from the old wooden floors. It was a peaceful routine that I had grown accustomed to, a sense of normalcy and tranquility that made me feel at home. Every night, I would sit at my desk, the soft glow of the computer screen lighting up the room, headphones blocking out the outside world. The isolation of the back bedroom was comforting. Perfect retreat after a long day. I felt safe there, in my own space, where nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. I had been engrossed in my music for hours when I finally decided to take a break and get a drink. As I removed my headphones, the sudden quiet of the house enveloped. But then, I heard it. Faint, eerie sound that made me pause. It was the sound of a woman crying, distant and haunting. It was so unexpected and out of place. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. Crying grew louder as I walked towards the door, yet it still seemed strangely distant, as if it were coming from somewhere far away and close by at the same time. It was surreal and deeply unsettling, a sound that sent chills down my spine. I stood at the door, my hand on the knob, hesitating. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Was it a neighbor? Prank? Something more sinister? Just as I was about to open the door, I heard 4 loud footsteps, each one echoing through the hallway with a sense of urgency. It sounded like someone, or something, was running towards my door. The crying stopped abruptly on the last step, leaving me in a heavy silence. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, frozen in fear, trying to gather the courage to see what was on the other side. I stood there, hand outstretched towards the doorknob, every muscle in my body tense with fear. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more terrifying than the last. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow, quick gasps. It took every ounce of willpower I had to push past the fear and take action. After what felt like an eternity, I finally gathered the courage and flung the door open, fully expecting to come face to face with someone. But the hallway was empty. The silence was deafening, and the house felt colder, as if the eerie presence had left a lingering chill in the air. I stepped out into the hallway, every nerve on edge. I checked each room meticulously, starting with the other bedrooms, and moving to the living room, the kitchen, and finally the front door. Every door was locked, every window secure. There were no signs of forced entry, no disturbed furniture, nothing to explain the footsteps or the crying. I double-checked everything, even though I knew it was pointless. The house was just as it had been before I put on my headphones. The eerie sounds had no logical explanation. I stood in the middle of the living room, the unsettling realization washing over me that whatever had caused those noises was beyond my understanding. The sense of security I had always felt in my home was shattered, replaced by a lingering fear of the unknown. After that night, the atmosphere in the house changed. The crying returned sporadically, each occurrence sending a wave of dread through me. It was never at the same time or place, but the sound was unmistakable, haunting, distant, and unnervingly sorrowful. Each time I heard it, I would freeze, my heart pounding as I strained to pinpoint its source. Footsteps never came back, but the crying was enough to keep me on edge. I found myself constantly on high alert, my ears tuned to the slightest sound, my eyes scanning every shadow. A sense of peace and tranquility that I had once found in my home was replaced by a constant gnawing unease. Simple tasks like getting a drink or going to the bathroom became fraught with tension. I would stop, listen, and wait, half expecting to hear the crying start again. Even in broad daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. My sleep was restless, plagued by nightmares and sudden awakenings. Each night, I would lie in bed, listening to the silence, waiting for the next inexplicable noise. I tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. The crying continued to echo in my mind, chilling reminder that something was very wrong in my home. Living in that constant state of vigilance took its toll. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally, always waiting for the next inexplicable noise, always wondering what would happen if the crying didn't stop. Even now, the memory of that night lingers in my mind, haunting me in quiet moments. The sound of those footsteps, so real and so terrifying, is something I will never forget. It has left a permanent mark on me, a reminder of a fear I can't fully comprehend. I have always considered myself a logical person, a skeptic who doesn't easily believe in the supernatural. But no matter how hard I try, I cannot explain what happened in that house. Crying, the footsteps, the eerie atmosphere, all of it defies reason. I have replayed that night over and over in my head, searching for a rational explanation, but I always come up empty. Living with that unresolved mystery is unsettling. It's like having an itch you can never quite scratch, a question that will never be answered. Fear and uncertainty have become a part of me, a shadow that follows me wherever I go. As I moved out of that house and into a new place, I hoped to leave those experiences behind. But the memory of that crying, those footsteps, continues to send chills down my spine. The fear never truly goes away. It's a reminder that sometimes there are things in this world that we cannot explain, things that lurk just beyond the edge of our understanding, waiting to remind us that we are not always in control. In the end, I have come to accept that I may never know what really happened in that house. It remains an eerie, inexplicable chapter of my life, a story of fear and uncertainty that I will carry with me always. It was about 2 years ago, on a chilly autumn evening. My parents had decided to go out for a rare date night, leaving me alone at home. I was 16 at the time, and they trusted me enough to handle a few hours by myself. Our house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew each other, and nothing much ever happened. Or so I thought. The night started off like any other. My parents kissed me goodbye and reminded me to lock the doors and not to open them for anyone. I nodded, assuring them I'd be fine. After they left, I settled onto the couch with a bowl of popcorn, ready to binge-watch my favorite TV show. The comforting hum of the television filled the living room, and I felt perfectly content and safe. An hour or so passed, and I decided to take a break from the TV. I grabbed my laptop and moved to the dining table to finish some homework. The clock ticked steadily, and the house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. I was halfway through my math assignment when I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly brushed it off. It was probably just a neighbor. Little did I know, that ordinary evening was about to take a terrifying turn. The sound of the car door slamming shut pulled me away from my homework. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked over to the window, peeking through the curtain. There was an unfamiliar car parked in front of our house. An old, beat-up sedan looked out of place in our neighborhood. A man stepped out, and my stomach tightened with unease. He was tall and lanky, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, casting shadows over his face. His movements were deliberate, almost too calm. As he approached our front door, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about him seemed off, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just a delivery guy. I hesitated for a moment, then heard the doorbell ring. The sound echoed through the quiet house, making me jump. I took a deep breath and approached the door, standing on my tiptoes to peer through the peephole. A man stood there, shifting slightly from one foot to the other, holding a small package in his hands. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Delivery for your parents?" he replied, his voice muffled but clear enough to understand. "I need someone to sign for it." I hesitated. My parents hadn't mentioned expecting any deliveries. "My parents aren't home right now," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Can you come back later?" There was a pause, and then he spoke again. "Just open the door and sign for it. It'll only take a second." Something about his tone made my skin crawl. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "I'm sorry, I can't. You'll have to come back." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, in a voice that sent ice through my veins, he said, "Come on, just open the door, my name." I froze. How did he know my name? Panic surged through me, and I backed away from the door. I didn't know what to do, but every instinct screamed at me to get away. The man started knocking harder, more insistently. My mind raced, and without thinking, I turned and bolted towards the bathroom, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own ragged breathing. I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, trying to listen. The stranger's voice was muffled now, but I could still hear him. He was rattling the front door, trying to get in. I sank to the floor, my heart pounding, and prayed he would go away. When the stranger said my name, it felt like a jolt of electricity shot through my body. How did he know my name? The fear that had been gnawing at the edges of my mind suddenly exploded into full-blown panic. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I stumbled away from the door, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I darted down the hallway, my thoughts a chaotic swirl of fear and confusion. I had to hide. I needed a place where he couldn't find me. The bathroom was the first place that came to mind. I rushed in, slamming the door behind me and locking it with trembling fingers. I pressed my back against the door, trying to steady my breathing. The house was eerily silent, except for the faint sounds of the stranger outside. I strained to listen, every creak and rustle amplified in the stillness. I heard him try the doorknob, rattling it with increasing frustration. My skin prickled with fear. What if he managed to get inside? I sank to the floor, curling up in the corner farthest from the door. My mind raced through 1,000 horrible scenarios. What did he want? How did he know my name? I tried to stay calm, to think rationally, but the fear was overwhelming. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, listening. I heard him muttering something under his breath, the words too muffled to make out. Then came the sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving away from the door. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he was leaving. But then I heard the unmistakable sound of him trying the windows, one by one, checking if any were unlocked. My blood ran cold. I hugged my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small and quiet as possible. The only sound was my own ragged breathing, echoing in the confined space of the bathroom. Every second felt like an eternity. The footsteps moved back towards the front door, and I heard him try the knob one last time, harder this time, as if he was determined to break it open. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. The handle rattled violently, and I could hear the door straining under the pressure. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. There was a heavy silence, and I held my breath, waiting for the next sound. It felt like hours before I heard the faint creak of the front porch steps, and then the car door slamming shut. The engine roared to life, and I listened as the car drove away, the sound gradually fading into the night. I didn't move. I couldn't be sure he was really gone. My body was frozen with fear, every muscle tense and aching. I stayed there, huddled in the corner, for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the safety of my parents' return. Huddled in the corner of the bathroom, I tried to steady my racing heart, but the fear was overwhelming. My thoughts spiraled into dark places, each one worse than the last. Who was that man? How did he know my name? What did he want from me? I clenched my knees tighter to my chest, trying to make myself as small and inconspicuous as possible. Every tiny noise outside the bathroom amplified my fear. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I listened intently, straining to hear any sign that he might still be out there. The minutes dragged on, feeling like hours. I couldn't bring myself to move, even peek out the door. My imagination ran wild, envisioning him lurking just outside, waiting for me to make a sound, to give away my hiding place. I could still hear the echo of his voice in my mind, old and calculating, saying my name like he knew me. I heard the distant rumble of thunder and the soft patter of rain against the windows, adding to the tense atmosphere. Every creak and groan of the house made my heart skip a beat. I tried to focus on the rhythm of my breathing, to calm myself down, but it was no use. The fear was too intense, too immediate. Then I heard the faint sound of footsteps again. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving through the house. I could hear him trying the windows again, each one rattling as he checked if it was locked. The sound grew louder as he approached the bathroom door. My heart pounded in my ears, and I pressed my back harder against the wall, as if I could somehow melt into it and disappear. The footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom. I held my breath, my whole body trembling. The doorknob jiggled slightly, then more forcefully. He was trying to get in. Panic surged through me, and I fought the urge to scream. I covered my mouth with my hand, muffling any sound that might escape. The doorknob rattled violently, and I could hear his frustrated muttering on the other side. For a moment, it felt like the door would give way. Then, mercifully, he stopped. There was a heavy silence, and I listened as the footsteps retreated. I heard the front door creak open and then slam shut. The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't move. I couldn't. What if he was still out there, waiting for me to come out? Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The rain continued to patter against the windows, the sound almost soothing in its regularity. I glanced at my phone, the screen lighting up to show the time. It had only been 15 minutes since my parents had left, but it felt like a lifetime. Minutes turned into hours. My muscles ached from sitting so still, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I was terrified that any noise, any movement might bring him back. I kept my ear pressed to the door, listening for any sign of his return. My anxiety grew with each passing minute, the fear settling deep into my bones. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My parents were home. Relief washed over me, and I slowly got up, my legs shaky and weak. I unlocked the bathroom door and cautiously stepped out, my heart still pounding. As I made my way to the front door to meet them, I couldn't shake the feeling that this nightmare was far from over. The moment I heard the familiar sound of our car pulling into the driveway, a wave of relief washed over me. I stumbled out of the bathroom, my legs still shaky from the hours of tension, and rushed to the front door. As soon as I saw my parents walking up the steps, I felt like I could finally breathe again. My mom opened the door, her smile fading as she saw my pale, terrified face. "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I could barely get the words out, my voice trembling as I recounted the events of the evening. There was a man, he said he had a package, but he knew my name, and he tried to get in. My dad's expression turned from concern to anger. "Did he get inside?" he demanded, looking around the house as if the stranger might still be there. I shook my head. "No, I locked myself in the bathroom until you came back." My parents exchanged worried glances. My mom pulled me into a tight hug, her hands trembling. "Thank God you're safe," he whispered. My dad called the police immediately, reporting the incident. As he spoke on the phone, I could see the tension in his shoulders, anger and fear he was trying to keep in check. My mom sat me down on the couch, wrapping a blanket around me, trying to soothe my frayed nerves. When the police arrived, I recounted everything to them as well. They took my statement, asked questions, and promised to patrol the neighborhood more frequently. They said they'd do everything they could to find the man who had terrorized me. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly started to return to normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling of fear that lingered, the memory of the stranger's voice, and the way he knew my name. Every time I heard a car pull up or a knock on the door, my heart would race, and I'd feel that same cold dread wash over me. One evening, about a month later, I was watching the news with my parents. They were discussing a recent string of home invasions in nearby neighborhoods. My blood ran cold as they showed a photo of a suspect. It was the man from that night, his face unmistakable. He's been identified as a suspect in several attempted break-ins. News anchor said, "You see this man? Do not approach him. Contact the authorities immediately." I felt my mom's hand tighten around mine, her face pale. "That's him," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "That's the man who came to our house." My dad stood up, his face grim. "We need to call the police again. Let them know." As he made the call, I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Seeing the stranger's face confirmed my worst fears. but it also left me with an unsettling feeling of unresolved tension. He was still out there, somewhere, and the memory of that night would haunt me for a long time to come. Moving into my new place was a mix of excitement and nerves. For the first time in my life, I was going to be living completely alone. It was a small, 2-story house on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I had spent the whole day unpacking and arranging my things, trying to make it feel like home. The excitement of having my own space was exhilarating. I could decorate how I wanted, play my music as loud as I liked, and just enjoy the peace and quiet. But there was also a hint of nervousness. Living alone meant no roommates or family around if something went wrong. I tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing on the positives. As night fell, the house took on a different atmosphere. Emptiness and quiet that had seemed so appealing during the day now felt a bit unsettling. The first floor was still mostly empty, with just a few boxes scattered around. I had set up my bedroom on the second floor, making it as cozy as possible with my bed, a nightstand, and a small lamp. I decided to call it a night around midnight. I double-checked the front door to make sure it was locked, then headed upstairs. The house was silent, the only sound being the faint creaks of the wooden floorboards as I walked. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, and tried to relax. The excitement of the day had left me exhausted, and I soon drifted off to sleep. That first night, the house was incredibly quiet. No sounds from neighbors, no hum of traffic, just an almost oppressive silence. It was both peaceful and unnerving. I told myself it was just something I'd get used to, that soon it would feel like home. Little did I know this was just the calm before the storm. I woke up abruptly at 4 a.m. to the sound of a music box playing "It's a Small World." At first, I thought I was dreaming. I lay there in the dark, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of the tinkling tune floating up from downstairs. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was a neighbor's music, or perhaps I'd left something on. But no, it was unmistakably coming from within my own house. Groggy and confused, I sat up in bed and listened intently. The music was faint but clear, its cheerful melody eerily out of place in the middle of the night. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and decided I had to investigate. There was no way I'd be able to fall back asleep without knowing what it was. I grabbed my phone for light and cautiously made my way downstairs. The house was eerily silent except for the persistent, haunting tune. The first floor was still mostly empty, just a few unpacked boxes and some basic furniture. My footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floor, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. As I descended the stairs, the music grew louder, more distinct. The living room was dark, the shadows stretching across the floor and walls. I flipped on the light switch, and the sudden brightness was almost blinding. The music continued, its source still elusive. I walked around, checking each room, my heart pounding in my chest. I was certain I had locked the front door before going to bed. I double-checked it now, and it was indeed locked, just as I had left it. The realization sent a chill down my spine. How could there be a music box playing if I was alone and the house was locked up? I followed the sound, each step feeling heavier than the last. It led me to the corner of the living room, where a small, old wooden box sat on one of the unpacked boxes. I hadn't noticed it before, and I was sure I hadn't brought any music boxes with me. My hands trembled as I reached for it, the cheerful melody now grating on my nerves. I opened the lid, and the music stopped abruptly. Inside, the box was empty. I stared at it in bewilderment, my mind racing to comprehend what was happening. How did this box get here? Why was it playing that song? And most importantly, who or what had started it? The silence that followed was almost more unnerving than the music had been. The house felt wrong, like something was watching me. I quickly closed the box and backed away, my heart still racing. I decided to bring it upstairs with me, too unsettled to leave it behind. As I climbed the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't as alone as I thought. As I stood there, gripping the small wooden box, the silence in the house felt almost suffocating. I couldn't understand how the music had started on its own, or why the box was there in the first place. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Determined to find some answers, I began a thorough search of the house. I started in the living room, moving methodically through the darkened space. Flashlight on my phone cast long, eerie shadows across the walls, making the familiar shapes of furniture and boxes look distorted and menacing. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet sent a shiver down my spine. As I moved into the kitchen, the oppressive silence was broken only by the occasional drip of the faucet. I checked every cupboard and drawer, looking for any sign of intrusion, but everything was in its place. My thoughts were a chaotic jumble of fear and confusion. How had that music box ended up in my living room? I made my way to the dining room, then to the small study next to it. The house felt alien, as if it had transformed into a different place in the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest, the anxiety building with each empty room I checked. Thought of calling someone crossed my mind. Who would believe this? Finally, I headed back to the living room. As I stood there, trying to calm my racing thoughts, I heard the faint strains of "It's a Small World" again. The sound was soft but unmistakable, sending a jolt of fear through me. Followed the music, my steps hesitant and shaky. The tune led me to the staircase. Took a deep breath and began to climb, the music growing slightly louder with each step. It was coming from upstairs. The realization made my skin crawl. I had just come from there, and there had been no sign of the music box. When I reached the top of the stairs, I paused, straining to listen. The music seemed to be coming from my bedroom. My hands shook as I pushed open the door. There, on my nightstand, was the same small wooden box I had just brought upstairs. It was open, and the haunting melody filled the room. I approached it cautiously, my mind reeling. I had left the box closed and downstairs. How had it moved? I reached out and closed the lid, silencing the music once again. My heart pounded in the deafening silence that followed. As I stood there, staring at the box, a chilling realization dawned on me. This wasn't just a case of a misplaced item or a simple prank. Something was very wrong in this house. Fear that had been gnawing at me since I first heard the music now settled deep in my bones. I knew that whatever was happening was far from over. After finding the music box in my bedroom, my mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I couldn't comprehend how it had moved or why it was playing that eerie melody. Every rational explanation I could think of seemed inadequate. I lay in bed that night, clutching the covers, my eyes darting to every shadow and listening intently for any sound. Sleep was elusive, and when it finally came, it was restless and filled with unsettling dreams. In the days that followed, my sense of unease grew stronger. It started with small, seemingly inconsequential things. I would find objects out of place. Books that had been on the shelf were now on the floor, kitchen utensils moved from drawers to countertops, and doors I knew I had closed were found ajar. At first, I tried to brush it off, telling myself that I was just being forgetful in my new home. The noises were harder to ignore. Late at night, I would hear faint footsteps coming from the first floor, the sound of something scratching against the walls, and once, the unmistakable creak of the front door opening and closing. Each time I investigated, I found nothing out of the ordinary. The fear lingered, gnawing at my nerves. One particularly terrifying incident shattered any remaining doubts I had about something being very wrong. It was a quiet evening, and I was in the living room, trying to relax with a book. The house was still, the only sound the occasional turning of a page. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness before stabilizing. I felt a cold draft as if a window had been opened, but I knew they were all closed. Then I heard it, a soft, barely perceptible whisper. It was a hissing sound, like someone speaking just out of earshot. I stood up, my heart racing, and tried to pinpoint the source. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and seemed to be coming from the hallway. I grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight, cautiously moved towards the hallway. As I stepped into the corridor, the whispering stopped abruptly. The silence was oppressive, air thick with tension. I shone the light around, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes landed on the basement door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly open. I knew I had locked that door earlier. My hands trembled as I approached it, the cold draft growing stronger. I pushed the door open fully and shone the light down the stairs. The basement was dark, the beam of my flashlight barely penetrating the inky blackness. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs, each step echoing ominously. Halfway down, I heard the music box again. The haunting melody of It's a Small World echoed up from the basement, louder and more distorted than before. Panic surged through me and I froze, unable to move. The music grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a cold, oppressive presence surrounding me. I turned and bolted back up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. I locked it, my hands shaking, and backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. The music continued to play, muffled by the door, and I knew then that this was no ordinary house. Something malevolent was here with me, something that wanted me to know it was there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my bedroom with every light on, my eyes fixed on the door, and the music box lying on the floor where I had thrown it in a fit of panic. I felt a deep, pervasive sense of dread, knowing that whatever was happening was far from over. After that terrifying night, I knew I couldn't continue living in fear. Constant disturbances, the eerie music box, and the sense of being watched were taking a toll on my sanity. I decided to investigate the history of the house, hoping to find some answers. Maybe, just maybe, understanding what was happening could help me find a way to stop it. I started my search at the local library, poring over old newspapers and property records. The librarian was helpful, but her curiosity was piqued when I mentioned the address. She shared a knowing look and led me to a section of the archives that contained local legends and histories. What I found sent chills down my spine. The house had a dark history. It was built in the early 1900s and had changed hands many times over the decades. According to the records, there had been several reports of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. One article detailed the mysterious disappearance of a young girl who had lived there in the 1950s. Her family had been plagued by strange noises and the sound of a music box playing in the night, just like I had experienced. I also discovered that one of the previous owners, a recluse named Samuel Thornton, had been found dead in the house under suspicious circumstances. The details were vague, but it was clear that something malevolent had been present in the house for a long time. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had tormented them was now tormenting me. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to seek help. I contacted a local paranormal investigator, a man named Michael, who had a reputation for dealing with haunted houses. He listened intently as I recounted my experiences and shared what I had discovered about the house's history. Michael agreed to come to the house and conduct an investigation. The night he arrived, the atmosphere was tense. He set up his equipment, cameras, audio recorders, and various sensors, while I watched, hoping that he could provide some answers. As the night wore on, the disturbances began again. We heard the faint sound of footsteps, the whispering voices, and of course, the music box. Michael's equipment captured everything: unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations, sudden drops in temperature, and faint voices that seemed to come from nowhere. It was both validating and terrifying, as my experiences confirmed. Michael concluded that the house was indeed haunted, likely by multiple spirits. He suggested a cleansing ritual, try and rid the house of its unwanted guests. I agreed, desperate for any solution that might bring peace. The ritual was intense, involving prayers, smudging with sage, and the sprinkling of salt around the house. As Michael conducted the cleansing, I felt a sense of tension building, as if the house itself was resisting. But slowly, the oppressive feeling began to lift. The atmosphere felt lighter, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. After Michael left, the house was quiet. The music box remained silent, and the strange occurrences ceased. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I slept peacefully that night for the first time since moving in. In the days that followed, the house remained calm. I felt a cautious optimism, but the lingering fear was still there, just beneath the surface. I couldn't forget what had happened, and I knew that the house's dark history always be a part of it. But I also felt a sense of survival, a determination to move forward despite the lingering fear. Reflecting on the events, I realized that while the supernatural disturbances had been terrifying, they had also shown me my own resilience. I had faced my fear and sought help, and in doing so, reclaimed my home. The experience left me with a deep respect for the unknown and a reminder that sometimes the scariest things are those we can't fully understand. Though the tension was unresolved and the fear never entirely left, I knew I could live with it. The house was mine, and I was determined to make it a place of peace, no matter what had happened there before.